Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Hogan, would you take roll, please?
Mayor Wilson,
Here.
Trustee LeKind,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Elliott is noted absent. Trustee Ramos,
Here.
Trustee Romanello,
Here.
Trustee Shaning,
Here.
Trustee Stevens.
Here. Okay, before we get to our agenda, I'd like to ask Chief Hemingway to maybe step up, say a few words in regards to today's funeral of Deputy Perry, and then offer a moment of silence.
Thank you very much, Mayor. With me is a few members of the department. First and foremost, I just want to thank this community for the support they've shown the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. I've gotten calls from many of the people sitting up here representing the town. We've been out in the community helping the Sheriff's Office the best we can. As a result of the tragedy from last week where we lost Deputy Andrew Perry. And it's been a tough one. He was a SWAT operator. He was a father. But this community came together well for it. And it reminds us why we're a great community. But I spoke to Mayor Wilson earlier, and he actually brought up the idea to definitely recognize our brothers. We don't recognize the Monument Police Department or the Fountain or the Colorado Springs or the Manitou Police Department. We look at us as one big family, and it hurts for everybody. And I'm very thankful for the Monument police officers. They were ready to respond. We were there standing with the sheriff when much of this was going down, and truly it was a sad thing. But if you find it in your hearts to provide a moment of silence, or just keep the family in your prayers, or if that's appropriate, or at least in your thoughts, we would certainly appreciate it. So, Mayor, like we talked about, if we could do a moment of silence, that'd be great.
Okay, at this time, we'll take a moment of silence.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Okay, before us, we have an agenda and a consent agenda. Do we have any modifications to the agenda? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Ms. Hogan, will you take roll, please?
Trustee Shaning,
Yes.
Trustee Ramos,
Yes.
Mayor Wilson,
Yes.
Trustee LeKind,
Yes.
Trustee Stevens,
Yes.
Trustee Romanello.
Yes.
That motion passes 6-0. Item 3 on the agenda, Creek Week. Ms. Vanden Hook, did you have any comments for this particular item?
I don't have any additional comments other than we do plan on participating in this event. The date is tentative, but it will most likely be September 24th
Okay.
that we will participate.
And we have Ms. Brodigan with the Watershed. Did you have any comments you'd like to make? The podium up here.
Thank you so much for allowing me to address you all today. My name is Amy Brodigan. I'm the Watershed Outreach Coordinator for the Fountain Creek Watershed District. And I'm here in regards to Creek Week, and I understand there will be a proclamation issued recognizing it. It runs from September 24th to October 2nd of this year. We always bring in thousands of volunteers over hundreds of sites over that 9-day period, and we remove literally tons of litter. And again, it's all volunteer driven. We do provide the crew leader training and the supplies, and we really appreciate the town of Monument always supporting this really important effort. I do have save the date cards at the end of the table at the end there, so if you'd like to take one, you're welcome to. And our website is on there, so you can register to be a crew leader. That registration is open already, and then in the next couple of days, the public events listing will start being posted, and that's where, if you wanted to join a crew, you would be able to see which cleanups are in the vicinity and the days and times, and then you would register with those crew leaders directly. We do have one in place for the 24th in Monument, being led by Portia Herman. Right now it's looking like 9 a.m. to 12 noon. And the meeting would be at Santa Fe Trailhead on 3rd Street. And again, you would register with the crew leader. And again, that will come up on the website in just a couple of days. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Has the board have the opportunity to read this proclamation? And is the board in agreement with it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Trustee LaKine, would you read the proclamation, please?
Proclamation recognizing Creek Week 2022. Whereas the town of Monument is fortunate to have extensive and diverse natural resources such as forests, grasslands, riparian areas, lakes, creeks, and a wide variety of open spaces. And whereas the Fountain Creek Watershed is a unique and important resource and asset to the residents and visitors of Monument and the Pikes Peak region. And whereas the Fountain Creek Watershed Flood Control and Greenway District is partnering with the City of Colorado Springs, El Paso County, Pueblo County, and the cities of Manitou Springs, Fountain, and the towns of Monument and Green Mountain Falls, and numerous community organizations to coordinate the 9th annual Creek Week cleanup, which will encourage the protection, restoration, and maintenance of the Fountain Creek Watershed. And whereas this 9-day litter cleanup effort runs September 24th through October 2nd, 2022 throughout the watershed and is now the largest cleanup effort in our state. And whereas Creek Week programs and activities are designed to raise awareness about the littering issue within our watershed, to encourage organizations and individuals to collect litter and debris to make Fountain Creek and the watershed cleaner and safer. And whereas businesses, churches, schools, nonprofits, neighborhood associations, youth groups, service clubs, and individuals are encouraged to form a creek crew to clean up at a Creek Week project site. And whereas Creek Week litter removal activities will reduce pollution in our creeks and clogs in our waterways that can lead to flooding, provide for safer drinking water supply, and enhance wildlife habitat and property values. Now, therefore, the Board of Trustees of the Town of Monument hereby proclaim September 24th through October 2nd, 2022 as Creek Week, and encourage our citizens to help protect, restore, and maintain our waterways by participating in Creek Week activities proclaimed this 15th day of August, 2022.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us to item 4, ordinance number 15/2022, amending Title 18 regarding planned unit development. Ms. Ruiz.
Thank you, Nina Reese. Planning. Let me just pull up the presentation. So as you stated, this is a proposed amendment regarding PUDs and plats. I'll be brief with the background because I'm sure you're all familiar with the background. But section 1.16.140 limits the number of land use items to 5 applications, 2 of which can be PUD or subdivision type actions. I propose to remove this from the code on July 5th. And at that time, you provided direction to not remove that requirement, but to instead take a look at if there were other creative solutions in order to allow for efficient hearings and to also ensure at the same time that all rules and regulations were followed. On August 1st, you approved part 1 of that plan, which was to provide notice to the adjacent property owners prior to submission to the town. So that would allow for staff and the hearing bodies as well to be aware of if there are controversial items so that we can only place maybe that one single item on the agenda. And it also facilitates interaction between the applicant and people from the public who may have issues or concerns with the development so that they can work out those issues in advance of even coming to a public hearing. So the proposed amendments that you're going to hear today were sent out to the public as well as the industry for comments. I did get a letter from the HBA, which is included in your packet, that they support this request. And then there's also a letter from Mr. King indicating that he also supports the request. There were other discussions and email correspondence back and forth, but nothing that's really necessarily a support letter, and then nothing that's necessarily against the application either. Colorado Revised Statute 3123-305 grants the Board of Trustees the authority to not only adopt regulations, but also to amend those regulations from time to time. The Planning Commission did hear the proposed amendments last week, which was August 10th of 2022, and they made the following modifications. What I've handed out to you is the draft minutes. They're the draft minutes because they won't be finalized until after the next Planning Commission hearing. But we did already send those draft minutes out to the Planning Commission for any kind of responses or if they wanted to see any modifications. But this is just a summary of what the Planning Commission just determined and then the discussion. So the Planning Commission included several modifications. The first modification was that they did not feel as though sketch plan should go to the Board of Trustees, and instead they wanted the final hearing body to be the Planning Commission. I had suggested that the sketch plan should go to the Board of Trustees because the sketch plan is the first initial cursory review of a proposed very large scale development, and I thought that it was in everyone's best interest for not only the Planning Commission, but the Board of Trustees to also agree that they're in support of that development before the applicant moves forward with the proposal. The Planning Commission did not feel that same way, and they wanted that stricken. So if you as a board would still like to hear sketch plans, you could make that part of your motion today. You could provide direction. So the next amendment was they wanted it to be clear in the regulations that a sketch plan does not mean that all subsequent applications will be approved. So they asked for staff to put together some language to provide that information to the applicants and then to also put it in the regulations that just because there's a sketch plan doesn't mean that a rezone or a subdivision has to be approved by the hearing bodies. So the final language is approval of the sketch plan shall in no way be construed to infer a requirement or obligation of the Board of Trustees to approve any future land use requests within the boundaries of the sketch plan. Next, they wanted to add additional review criteria for the plat, which reads, prior to acting on the plat, the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees must find that the phasing plan will not impede the orderly growth of public services and infrastructure necessary to efficiently serve each individual phase development and the entire land area included within the plat approval. And then lastly, they just added some additional modifications. What you'll read in the minutes is Mr. Orris had indicated that he added those additional modifications to place more emphasis on the importance and significance of the Planning Commission as a hearing body. So now I'm going to just summarize the proposed amendments, and I'll do the PUD first, followed by the plat, and then we'll break for any questions that you might have after each one of them. So the proposal for the PUD would be to combine what's now the preliminary PUD with the final PUD into one single zoning action versus the current regulations in some ways mix a zoning action with a site plan approval. So there would be one single PUD application that would be submitted. Adjacent property owners would be notified of the request in advance of the hearing. They would go through the review process. They would still have to go to the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees. All of the same notifications would be sent out, signs posted, and so on. So procedurally, there would be no difference other than there's just one single application versus two. I thought that it might be important to provide an overview of what you could expect to see if you choose to approve the request when that first PUD plan comes before you. So I included the checklists in your packets today so you could get a better understanding, but just on the screen here, I have a summary of what you could expect. So the developer would have to prepare the layout of the roadways or easements, the specific lot layout, and also designate which areas are going to be tracks and designate the purpose of those tracks as well. So you would know where the open space is going to be, where any kind of detention pond is going to be, schools, etc. Any kind of specific buffering or transition that's being proposed would also have to be specifically noted on the PUD. So if they are proposing an additional setback on one side of, let's say, 100 feet, that would have to be specifically identified on the PUD. If they're proposing a solid stucco fence on one side in order to properly buffer, that would have to also be noted on the PUD. They would have to include the streetscape landscaping, but not the individual site landscaping. So the individual site landscaping would have to meet all code requirements, but it wouldn't be associated to the PUD. So it would just be along the major roadways that you would get a plan of the landscaping. They would have to include all dimensional standards, so all setback, height, lot coverage, and so on. All of those dimensional standards would have to be provided within the PUD plan. All permitted uses and accessory uses, any kind of requested modifications from the land development code would have to be included within that PUD plan, as well as architectural guidelines. So what you would end up with that PUD plan is somewhat like conventional zoning, except conventional zoning on steroids with all of these additional elements included, where you actually have the specific lot layout, the specific uses of any tracks, those architectural guidelines, and so on. I wanted to also provide you with information regarding the typical submission requirements for the PUD so that you would have a better understanding of how detailed and how much information the applicant has to provide at this stage. So they would have to provide that PUD drawing. They'd have to provide a drainage report, and that drainage report would have to identify that the proposed detention ponds are adequate. It would assist in identifying where those drainage easements have to be located and so on. They'd have to provide a preliminary grading report that demonstrates compliance with our criteria related to grading and erosion control. They'd have to provide a wildfire report or wildfire plan or a combination of the two. It'd have to provide a traffic study, and that traffic study would be based upon all of the permitted uses within the PUD. So highest and best use is what that traffic study would be based upon. A soils and geology report that would identify if there are any areas within the PUD that are unsuitable for building, or if there needs to be additional notes such as no basements because of high groundwater. And then, if applicable, a noise study to identify if they're proposing a residential type use, to identify that additional buffering might be necessary. Another proposed revision would be that a site plan would be required for all PUDs. Currently, a site plan is only required for conventional zoning, and then if you are within a PUD, your final PUD acts as that site plan approval. This would take away the ability for developers to ask for any kind of modifications of the PUD, but so far all of the developers have said that they're okay with that. Not being able to request additional modifications. So whatever is approved in the PUD is what the developer would have to end up submitting their site plan for and then constructing ultimately. The site plan would be reviewed based upon the other associated elements of the land development code. So all landscaping would have to be in compliance with the land development code. All lighting would have to be in compliance with the land development code, and so on, with no modifications whatsoever. Are there any questions regarding the PUD before we move on to the plat?
Questions from the board?
Yeah, one question I had, did the planning commission give a reason why they didn't want that to go through the board of trustees?
For the sketch plan,
Correct.
they did. So it's included in the minutes, and I'll just kind of summarize. They thought that with an item going before the Board of Trustees, there is an idea that there's an approval has been received. I let them know that an approval is received, even if it's by the Planning Commission versus the Board of Trustees, but they felt as though it confuses people.
I have a question about this. As these hearings that an applicant will come to us based on information that they've provided the town, which then goes to the planning commission. Is it legal for the planning commission to prevent the board of trustees as judge and jury from seeing evidence on an applicant's paperwork?
So I think we're just talking about just the sketch plan.
I'm not concerned about what it is.
Okay.
Does the planning commission have the authority to remove evidence that would come before us that the town has seen and the planning commission has seen, and now preventing us from seeing all the documentation that's been presented?
I don't think so. I don't quite, I guess my
public
question, my
record.
response would be, I'm not sure why they would remove, the record is the record, which is the record. So whatever is received from an applicant, received from the community members, emails, sketch plans, voices of opposition, voices of support, all of that stuff is received by the planning department. Is received by the planning department and then placed into the record. And then the record is then just that, the accumulation of all of those documents, all of those messages.
So but what's being proposed is to remove the sketch plan, is it not?
No, I don't think I made it very clear, so let me try again. So what the Planning Commission wanted is to not amend the regulations. So currently, sketch plans only go to the Planning Commission. They're never brought before the Board of Trustees. So I had proposed that they would be brought before the Board of Trustees because it's the first step in a very large scale development, and I thought the Board of Trustees should have a say-so whether or not they support that type of development.
I would agree with that.
I'm completely
Okay.
baffled by why sketch plans would be prohibited from coming to the board at all, and who decided to not provide them to us.
Well, we can change that right now.
And then the way that the regulations are currently written, the sketch plan only goes to the Planning Commission and does not continue on to the board.
I've sworn we've seen sketch plans before.
So the
We've
planning-
seen them in our final.
It's sketch PUDs, I think, is maybe what you're thinking of. And that was removed from the code at the beginning of this year, I think. Is that right? Yeah.
Well, I want to go on record saying I agree with you in that they should come before the board.
Yeah,
I agree.
and I
Okay.
appreciate you putting that in there because I think you've heard what people are trying to tell us. So I find that really helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
I have a question in regards to combining the preliminary PUD and the final. Does this, because in the past, we've had people where they would present a preliminary plan and then a final plan for what did they call it? Area 1 or development 1. And then they said, in the future, we're going to do development 2, and then we're going to do development 3. Does this prevent them or force them into something that the market might, because some of those things roll out, years later, and the market could completely change and it could be something completely different. So my concern is that we'd lock a developer into something like a 5-year plan, given inflation and everything else going on. I'm not sure if that's wise. Am I off base? Will that lock them into that, or can they still do a phased development?
They can absolutely still do a phased development, and this would actually allow for probably more flexibility in development than the current process. So with the preliminary PUD, they're still going to identify a list of permitted uses. So as long as those individual lots, they come in and whoever's wanting to go in there is included within that list of permitted uses, they can do so. If they construct a building, the business doesn't do well, somebody wants to repurpose that building, they can do so as long as their proposed uses within that list of permitted uses and they're meeting all other aspects of the PUD as well. So it won't lock them in the way that I think you mean. It's going to lock them in as far as that PUD is considered, though. So if they wanted to add additional uses, they would have to amend that PUD and go back through the process. If they wanted to change the dimensional standards, let's say they decide that the setbacks don't work, they would have to go back through the process. But it's actually making it more flexible versus more restrictive.
All right, thank you.
I think before we move on to the next phase, I would like to see how the rest of the board feels about the site plan requirement for all PUD zoning districts, because that seemed favorable to me to do it that way,
Say that again.
to have the site plan requirement for all PUD zoning districts as it was proposed by Ms. Ruiz.
So currently, if it's a non-PUD, it has a site plan requirements, but if it's a PUD, it does not.
Correct.
Is that correct?
It does not. The final PUD currently acts as that site plan approval. So what's being proposed is that all properties within the town would have to go through that site plan approval process. I would strongly recommend including that within the proposed revisions, because that's really the town's only way to
Yeah.
ensure that all associated rules and regulations are followed when they're looking at constructing.
So just to clarify, Darcy, you're just saying you agree with that wholeheartedly, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I think a better, or easier way to think about this is presently we have preliminary PUDs and final PUDs. You're in essence getting rid of the preliminary PUD step and making everything look more like the final PUD step. And with a final PUD, you have the site plan as part of it. So I think that might help you. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I would say it's probably closer to getting rid of the final PUD, because with the site plan will essentially become that final PUD is probably.
I think we're getting rid of this sketch plan as a conceptual piece. Preliminary PUD is more definition, but still conceptual. Final PUD is very definite, set, rigid.
Yeah.
And then that's why a final PUD has previously been a site plan, because it's that rigid.
So if we change that, then I think that's why it's even more important that we include this today.
Agreed.
Sounds good.
Additional questions on PUD before I move on to plat?
Yes, one question. Will you go back to your, sorry to make you go back, but to your commissioner, planning commission proposals? On, which one was it? No,
So the first one is sketch plan. The second one.
so the
is
second one, do we run into any legal liability if a sketch plan is approved and they bring back a final that's the exact same, and then we say, no, we don't have to approve this?
Well, Joe reviewed this language, but we'll have him answer that question.
Approval of a sketch plan shall in no way be construed as to infer a requirement or obligation of the board of trustees to approve any future land use requests within the boundaries of the sketch plan. Maybe I'm just not reading it right.
I think it's so, and Nina's going to talk about this, but the issue is vested rights. So that's when the developer has a right to build what is on the plan. And what this does, this provision is makes the vested rights come to the developer at a different stage. And so that's when they have the right to build whatever is on the final PUD is what it's been in the past. And the final PUD sets forth kind of it gives the developer an ability to rely on that.
Okay.
And so they have specific rights at that point. They're called vested rights, and they're statutory vested rights. So they have a legal entitlement to that plan. Until they get to that point, they don't have a legal entitlement to that plan. They have ever progressing investment-based expectations, which are different than rights. And so that's what the rub is so that, as you purchase some land, a hypothetical land, you purchase some land, and it's you want to place, it's ag land. It's easiest. It's ag land in the county, and you want to place a commercial development on there. You have in your idea an expectation that you're going to put commercial development on this ag land, agricultural land. But that is not set for, that's not supported by your actual rights. But as you go forward through the entitlement process and get that turned into a commercial zoning district, as you go through the process, you have more and more investment-based rights, which aren't statutory rights, but just investment-based rights, reliance rights. But at some point in the entitlement process, you get the commercial designation in the form of a statutory vested right, and that's when you have something you could bank on. You can argue about it at certain points that you have something you could bank on as a developer, but there's a final ultimate point where you have vested rights, and that's the key. And so we talk about that a lot here. And so folks, as they move through the entitlement process, they do get more and more expectation rights or investment-backed expectation rights, but they don't have vested rights. And that's where always the rub has been.
Okay.
And so I don't know if that answers your question, but
No,
I think it
that-
provides some
That
context.
clarify it. Thank you.
Does this bring that vested right earlier in the process now?
It can, and I think Nina was going to talk about that.
I can skip to that since we're already discussing it, and then we'll go back. Okay, so currently you would receive vested rights at the final PUD stage or at the final plat stage. The proposed revisions, you would receive vested rights at the plat or at PUD stage, but only if a plat has already been approved. So basically, your vested rights are later on in the process if you look at each one of them as being a specific step.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Go ahead, Ms. Reeves.
So the next proposed revision would be combining the preliminary and final plat into one. I put this graphic together because it clearly shows how little need there is for a preliminary plat. So up at the top, you'll see what's been provided as the preliminary plat, and then down below is the final plat. So you'll notice that really the only difference is that the preliminary doesn't include bearings and distances. So that's basically to help the surveyor out in drawing out that same legal description in the future. As you're also aware, at the final plat, that's when we get the Parker open space dedications or fees in lieu, and then also when the applicant enters into the public improvement agreement. So really, we've been requiring two steps when the only thing that we even request from the applicant at the final plat stage is a copy of their final plat. We don't ask for any additional reports or anything. So this one, to me, is a very simple proposed amendment. So for that reason, I only have one slide, but are there questions?
Questions from the board? Okay, continue, please.
So that is it. We already went over the vested property right. Staff does recommend approval of the ordinance. The Planning Commission also recommended approval with the modifications. Included within your packet, you'll see that there's the voting rationale that Mr. Orrs put together that you could review and read prior to making a decision if you wish to do so. Included within the Planning Commission, you'll also see that there was a request from Mr. Trujillo to put together a list of those PUDs that have not yet been substantially developed, because he thought that that could be important information for you. So the ones that haven't been substantially developed to date would be Wacondo Meadows, Connexus, Falcon Commerce, Monument Ridge, Village at Jackson Creek, and Home Place Ranch. Are there any questions?
Questions from the board at this time?
Just clarifying that within this ordinance as is involves a sketch plan coming to the board. Yes? No?
You would need to make that modification because I did make that change per the Planning Commission.
Okay.
So if you wanted sketch plans to come before the Board of Trustees and making your motion, you would add that back in. And if you included, well, let me check with the clerk to see if it's acceptable for you to say and all associated modifications.
I think the key is always to make sure that we understand specifically what we're voting on. So if it's one or two very discrete modifications, I think that's fine to the extent we're kind of incorporating by reference. I don't think I'm not sure how we would make sure that everybody knows exactly what they're voting on.
So the modifications would have to include throughout the regulations where it says Planning Commission approval related to sketch plan, it would be replaced by Board of Trustees approval. And then within the table, see what number that is, 1.1, it would be modifying table 1.1 as well to identify that the Board of Trustees is required to hear the item.
To that point, let me just throw this out. I know most people seem to be in favor of that. I'm not opposed to having the sketch plan just go to the Planning Commission because there is a clause in there that says that the developer is not bound, or we're not bound by the sketch plan. So I think it cuts down in bureaucracy, and given the fact that we're not bound by that commitment, it's just a preliminary process. To me, it just makes things a little more expeditious. So anyway, that's my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Okay. Any other board comments?
So we have to vote not only on this ordinance, but whether we're making those modifications. And the site plan requirement for all PUD zoning districts is already written that way.
Mhm.
So the only modification is the whether we see the sketch plan or not.
I would recommend that we do an amendment and then vote on the amendment and then and then vote on the whole thing, whether the amendment goes or
Okay.
not.
I agree with that.
Okay, do we have any
Trying to
other,
find out how we word the amendment? So I'm trying to get to this.
Mr. Rivera.
do we have
Go ahead.
any other questions from the board at this time? Okay, this is a public hearing item. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on this item? Mr. King?
I'm Steve King. First of all, I am in favor of combining these plans because I like clarity. And I see that providing more information makes it more clear. We've had a lot of misunderstandings on projects in this town, starting at the sketch plan phases, which I do want to make a couple comments about the sketch plans because there's no secret I hate sketch plans. So almost all of the problems that we've had in this town revolve around the sketch plans and the presentations that were made that pretty much, well, I'll just say it, it's like a dog and pony show almost, right? So these sketch plan presentations say one thing, and then when these applicants come back, it's an entirely different thing usually. And I thought that you guys had heard sketch plans and approved them. I was pretty confident of that. So if that's not the case, that's kind of news to me. So the site plans in these sketch plan presentations are referred to as marketing pieces. And after the applicant's questioned about the intent of the final product, when it doesn't conform to the presentation, then they just say it's simply a marketing piece and it doesn't really apply. But they also state that have approved those uses, so you have to go forward and approve the preliminary PUD at that point, right? And when the sketch plan becomes a PUD, a lot of times the codes get changed because there's not a lot of detail on those. I'd like to see a lot more detail on the sketch plans if sketch plans are going to be used. A good example would be like minimum lot sizes. So we don't end up with 37-foot wide lots just because a project asks for a certain amount of units and then they get the units and then they put the units on the PUD, but it changes the character of it. So an example would be, and this is kind of a close example, but a site that has 300 acres with 400 units. So when you do the calculations, it's like, 1 3/4 acres or something like that, but maybe 100 or so acres is not buildable. So that changes the character. So if they had on the sketch plans that this amount of land is in mouse habitat and it's not buildable, or these are the minimum lot sizes that we'll have for these types of uses, then we don't have those misunderstandings when they keep coming back and changing things. And that any place in the code where it says generally complies with the comprehensive plan, I think it should state at least substantially complies. There's one other comment that I had on some of the language, and that is under 18.03.450, I think is right, under PUD for the criteria. I think that in your criteria, it doesn't really state anything about whether or not it meets the codes. And I know a PUD is its own zone district with its own rules and regulations. I get that. But it should at least substantially comply with the existing codes. And if it doesn't comply, then it should be part of the narrative as to what part of the PUD doesn't comply. And particularly this comes up with setbacks because they always want to reduce the setbacks. And some of these setbacks along major roads, the comprehensive plan states that the setbacks should be increased, yet they come in with setbacks that are decreased over what is in the code. I just believe in a lot more detail, especially if we're going to use sketch plans. And I think that there should be at least a list on a PUD of what complies with the codes and what doesn't comply with the codes, so you can make an intelligent decision. Again, I'm good with combining the plans. I think they should be combined. I think that it's not to be expeditious necessarily, but just so that everybody has good information and you can make good decisions. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in person that would like to comment on this item? Mr. Anderson, do we have anyone online that would like to comment on this item? Okay. At this time, I'll close the public hearing portion of this item and bring it back to the board for further discussion or a motion.
If we wanted to make a longer list for these PUDs, would we do that at a separate occasion? Or we would, because that's not the same thing as what we're doing tonight. So
Correct.
could we look at that at a different point in time? Because we did recently do a workshop on commercial, but we didn't do anything residential. So I think it would be helpful to look at some of the lots and then the PUD list.
I would ask that we bring that up during board authorization and give town staff direction to bring that before us.
Okay, so that's separate. Thank you.
Okay.
So if we're going to amend this again, just to clarify, we would amend if the board feels like they want to have sketch plans reviewed. And then you said amending table 1.1 as well. It would be a 2-point process. Is that right?
So you would need to include the language within Title 18 under specifically section. And if you would like, I have the red lines, so if it makes everyone feel more comfortable, we could red light them here in the hearing, if that makes everyone feel comfortable. But otherwise, it would be specifically Let's look at 1, 2, 5. Section 18.02.220. So making modifications wherever it reads that the Planning Commission has the final authority, it would be the Board of Trustees, and then to that table 1.1 as well.
I'd just like to get clarification from my fellow trustees. I hear Trustee Stevens' point of being expeditious, which I like also. How is everybody feeling about sketch plans coming to us? Can I get some of the feedback there?
I'd like it to come to us.
I would as well.
If it's not going to cause more confusion, then and we can get the sketch plan to have details such as suggested by Mr. King, I think it would be valuable. But if the sketch plans are just drawings on a bar napkin, then they serve no purpose.
To me, I agree completely with Trustee LeKind. I think in my mind, if we could, I would like to have it now, make an amendment so they do come to us. And then, as Mayor had mentioned earlier, maybe at the authorization item, we could ask to look into PUDs a little bit more and the sketch plan rules more later on. So we could actually get those details like Mr. King had mentioned, at least vote on it and see if we could add it. So the sketch plan would actually be more than just a marketing piece.
That's for another time. Correct? Yeah, okay.
So right now we would
But is,
be putting it, just allowing us to see it and review it. And then later on, potentially making the requirements for the sketch plan more.
So if I make that, if I make a motion to add that amendment, how would you like me to word it?
I'm not sure I understood the amendment. I apologize.
You do?
I don't think I do.
Oh, then I guess we need to clarify that.
The amendment to add the provisions that the Board of Trustees reviews the sketch plan in addition to the Planning Commission reviewing the sketch plan.
But there's one other part, right?
So that would be amendments to section 18.02.220 and table 1.1 to include that the Board of Trustees has final hearing authority.
Okay, that was 18.02.220 and table 1.1. Yeah, I would make a motion to amend the ordinance to modify 18.02.222 for the board to review sketch plans and to modify table 1.1. Is that act? Oh, sorry, 220, did I? Okay.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Ms. Hogan?
Trustee Romanello,
Any discussion?
Oh, sorry.
Uh,
Not trying to.
Yeah, I didn't.
I'm sorry. I was just going to throw out, again, I just want to say that I feel like this is an unnecessary step. The final authority does still come to the board. I think this is a preliminary process that they go through the Planning Commission, which is screening. It's not hidden from anyone, so it's a public item. I suppose anybody could go to a Planning Commission and listen to it if they wanted to, or they get the notes and things like that. So that's.
We can't.
But we
Yeah,
can't. Yeah.
At the
Uh,
same time, though, we have a planning commission for a reason, and why do we need to
Add a second layer.
add a second layer of, our role should be the final presentation. We have a planning commission to go over all this stuff, so I'm in agreement with Trustee Stevens on this. Is there any further discussion before we move to a vote? Okay, Ms. Hogan, go ahead, please.
Trustee Romanello,
Yes.
Trustee Shaning,
Yes.
Trustee Stevens,
No,
Trustee Ramos,
Yes.
Mayor, oh, pardon me, Mayor Wilson,
No,
Trustee LeKind.
No.
that motion dies on a 3-3 tie. Do we have another motion or further discussion? Yes.
I'll move to approve ordinance number 15, 2022, and ordinance amending Title 18 regarding plan unit development zoning district subdivision regulations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Hogan?
Trustee Shaning,
Yes.
Trustee LeKind,
Yes.
Trustee Romanello,
Yes.
Trustee Stevens,
yes,
Trustee Ramos,
Yes.
Mayor Wilson.
Yes. That motion passes 6-0. That takes us to item 5, resolution number 63, 2022, intergovernmental agreement with Monument Academy. Chief Hemingway.
Good evening, Mayor and Board, and with me also is Ryan Graham, who's the president of Monument Academy, sitting in the audience. So feel free to ask him any questions as we go along, or when you find appropriate, Mayor. So this resolution essentially is something that's been in the works for some time now. When I first came here about 2.5 years ago, Prior to the 2F, back then the 2E proposal that was put before me by the town manager to work on and really do an assessment of the agency and our level of resources and capabilities, of course, coupled with funding opportunities, was to look at the safety of the schools, to look at the layout of the schools and the children and and what we do to bring the whole child, the sense of the whole child, the schools, the police, the parents working together to address long-term problems in this community, to work on issues like restorative justice, alternatives to arrest, but really to what's the Monument Police Department doing to get these children away from drugs, away from gangs. Terry Hayes, when she helped us and took the lead on the issue committee, one of the things she asked for commitment was for me on mental health. Not just in adults but in children. We see it time and time again. We see breakdowns in school violence, whether it's an active shooter and the tactical response, or whether it was a hurdle in the system where everybody knew that child needed some form of intervention, and everybody's just looking back saying, what could we have done differently? So we've met with District 38, we've met with Monument Academy. This year, Monument Academy was looking at some of how they do business with the sheriff's office. And Mr. Graham asked to meet with us probably about 4 months ago now. And he said, I'd really like to look at how we're addressing school safety in the sense of school violence. Whether it's the Guardian program where we beef up our own security. And I don't want to get too much into that unless it was, essentially an executive session where we're giving away their tactics and their planning, because I think that'd be inappropriate. But they asked, what we could do differently. And my perspective's always been, an officer or a guardian on campus bell to bell, because, when you don't have somebody there, that's when things can happen. And then when you go back to the original hope and the projected outcome of improving how we protect our children, it was bringing that whole sense of community, that whole child. So this resolution requests permission for us to, and legal's approved it, for us to provide an SRO for the Monument Academy East and West Campus. Understanding both of them are out of the town, I just want to be very transparent on that, but also understanding that the majority of these, or a good portion of these students, are our children. They're Monument kids. We've been sworn in as deputies. We've met with the sheriff's office with their staffing issues like everybody else's. They're fully welcoming us into their schools, into the county. With the passage of 2F, we feel that we would be the first responding agency as a force multiplier to any tragedy, and probably the majority of the schools on the the north end of the county. Having an SRO in there, we feel, would not only give us a better chance to understand the children, but from a tactical perspective, be in a better position to respond and eliminate a threat quickly, or quicker than we would not understanding the layout and the students. Some of the things I really just want to highlight in my notes. We're averaging now 3 to 4 patrols. So we have the ability to respond as that force multiplier. We have more supplemental units. We have more. We have a traffic officer. We have our detectives. We've added a detective as promised. We've had an increase in personnel here in the building doing the administrative function, which frees up the officer of the street, which would respond, obviously if there was an issue to any of these schools. And part of this, with the grant that we looked at and presented last meeting, more neighborhood resource officers, more rotating school resource officers that would not only help here if we do get that grant, which we should know soon, but would also help us supplement the current schools, District 38. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to get us into the school, create that SRO platform, get some people trained. But really, I want to, as we expand our SRO and our neighborhood resource officers, not just with community engagement, I want to look at what are we doing to address mental health. And we've recently trained the majority of our department in crisis intervention training. So it's not just meeting violence with violence or meeting a bad situation, just trying to ship the person away. It's looking for those long-term solutions. So you'll see the resolution, it addresses everything from improved relationships to improved tactics to improved programs. The good thing about the resolution is we were able to provide a very fair, competitive cost to the Monument Academy. We actually were able to come in lower than the current deputy's proposed cost, while also building a 10% reserve to backfill the officer when the officer, the primary officer can't be there. Which would put a layer of overtime to make sure we had that bell-to-bell coverage, and to make sure we were able to provide the resource when it's an extracurricular activity. I think they have a week in the summer where they put a camp on, and then their games. And I've gotten a commitment from Monument Academy that we're gonna work to keep that 10% reserve a fair reserve, so they get a good usage of it, and we don't exceed it, and we're not nickel and diming each other. We're just we're there for the goal, is to be there when there's a function. So the total cost was $85,826.35, and what we did was we prorated that over the school year, understanding that when the officer's not in the school, they'll be here in the community working on whether it's a Citizens Police Academy or community events, or putting together some of those programs. We talked about a vision of games with the cops, where we work with partners to take some of the underprivileged children to maybe their first hockey game or their first baseball game up in Denver. So as we expand these services, we look to utilize that officer in the summertime doing events like that. And aside from that, that's pretty much the resolution, the cost. I know I have a memo to the board in there, and I'm just really here to answer any questions and maybe providing clarity to this program if anybody has any questions, as is Mr. Graham.
Okay, Mr. Graham, did you have any comments before we went to questions?
Board, I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm here to stand in full support of this resolution. I would like to thank Commander Lupton, Chief Hemingway for all their time, for engaging with us on this. Here in about 36 hours, we'll have 1,150 students being dropped off at 2 campuses, and I'm encouraging you guys tonight to adopt this so we can move forward with this and get this in place. So here to offer my full support. I also have our COO here tonight, Mr. Holmes. He's here to support this as well. So any questions I can answer.
Okay, thank you, sir. Questions from the board?
I have a couple questions. I'm in full support of this, but I do have some questions about the finances. Is it normal that when a police department is going to provide SROs, it's only funded at 75% versus 100?
So to answer that honestly, I don't know what the normal is. I took the IGA in place that the sheriff office used. I've looked at some of how I've done business in other police departments. A lot of times you'll see grant opportunities come in. So I don't think there's a set matrix on the funding and the way we do it. We just thought this was the best way. We looked at one point having a separate division of the Monument Police Department that would just be a school resource officer that was only hired bell to bell, with summers off to drive down costs. And in speaking with Chief Heber down in Fountain, they were having a tremendously difficult time recruiting just that part-time or seasonal officer because they were saying there weren't a lot of retirees. I was used to a different dynamic where were forced to retire at a certain time, and a lot of the officers down in South Florida were young, so they took that opportunity. He felt as if, Chief Heber felt as if I'd have some recruitment challenges if I just provided a seasonal officer with no benefits. So we went with the full-time officer, but prorated it on the back end.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I would assume some of that has to do just with the schedule.
Yes, yes.
So the officer's still working for the department on the off-season holidays, holiday breaks and stuff. So I would assume that they're only with the school district for 75% of their job.
Yeah, in fact, it actually came out a little under that, Mayor. And it was hard to tell. I'll give you an example. They have a Friday that's, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Graham. I think it's about a 6-hour day in total, the way we're looking to do business, where they're there just prior to the first bell and, just kind of as the last child's leaving. But on Friday, they had that short day. So that kind of threw off the matrix a little bit with the billing. And again, we weren't looking to nickel and dime them on the extracurricular activities. And I don't think they were looking to nickel and dime us on the full 40 hours a week. And this just seemed to be the cleanest approach. And back to Trustee Lakine. I should have brought that up a second ago. This is based on a 2-year officer salary. We didn't know if it'd be a 3-year officer or a 1-year officer. So we took that 2-year officer where in advertising, Commander Lupton advertised it last week. And it looks like both officers have that amount of experience on average that applied for this.
Other questions from the board?
I have one. Thank you so much, Chief. I am completely in support of this. I just had one question. So currently, I imagine this change is going to make it so if, God forbid, there is an incident at the school, now we're going to have direct communication from the security at the school with the rest of Monument PD, as opposed to whatever it is currently. So now it's going to be more efficient if there is a need for emergency response.
Yeah, absolutely. Not getting too far into their private side of the tactic, but we would be in direct contact. We would be training with their personnel, their internal staff. And then again, it's to ultimately expand this into the other D38 schools, either through attrition or just through having, that other, especially if we do get the grant, the other officer, rotating in. Currently, we're in the schools, we're walking the schools more, and we're enhancing our response to school violence in general.
Awesome. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. I appreciate what you guys are doing here and the process that's going on here. You mentioned earlier about mental health concerns and things like that. When my wife was a state representative, she got numerous calls from parents saying that their children were being bullied and the school would do absolutely nothing about it. Now, I don't think it was specifically Monument Academy or any of those, but my point is, and then since that time, she followed every one of the school shootings and noticed that there was a pattern of children that were people that were doing these violent outbursts were a result of having a history of having been bullied. So hopefully that we can address that and also I think what's a very positive thing is in a climate in our nation when police are looked upon as hostile, I think this can build a community relationship between our police department and the kids that are going through school and seeing that a police officer can be someone they can go to for help. And so I hope those positive outcomes can come forth out of this.
Yeah, and just on that note, and it's very important for me to underscore and highlight this. The program is only as good as the SRO. And the SRO is only as good as the organizational culture. If your organizational culture continues to let your officers down, whether it's the elected body or the chief or the community, and they feel, crippled in doing their job, they're going to be crippled during that incident. And then on the other side, and I've actually been guilty of this in the past decades ago, sometimes we would put some of our less premier officers in schools as a way to bury them. And I think we've learned over the years that these schools deserve exactly what Trustee Stevens is talking about, the best of the best. You know, there doesn't have to be a policy for, you know, how you make a child feel better about themselves or to deal with a bully. And that's our goal. And that will be the outcome, that we put the best of the best in these schools. And that's one of the reasons why District 38 is a little reluctant to switch over to Monument right now, because they have the best of the best. You know, Chad Wheat, Corey, you know, these people are taking the time to invest in the kids, and we're gonna mirror that model for sure.
It says that the Town of Monument Police Department will, and then there are four provisions, and this is page 5 of the agreement. Number 4 states provide an SRO in the school whenever possible, each day the school is in session. I'm just wondering if what does that mean? If an SRO has a family emergency or has to step out for a couple weeks, then what does the Town of Monument do? What is the expectation there? What is that's, I guess it just reads a little vague to me. And then below that in part 8, the SRO will, number 1, enhance safety, and then number 2 states provide a high visibility presence on campus. But what is a high visibility presence? So I don't know if there's some other wording somewhere else that we don't have. I guess if I were Monument Academy, I would be leery of the statement, provide an SRO in the school whenever possible, each day the school is in session. Is there some way to guarantee that they're never going to be in a situation where there is not an SRO for an extended period of time, and then, you know, heaven forbid, there's an incident when the SRO is gone, then what liability does the Town of Monument have?
And that's exactly why we left it a little bit open like that. Worst case scenario, something was going on at the East Campus or another District 38 school, and it's taking all resources to get there. You know, we may put that school on lockdown without getting too far into their tactical plan, relying on a private guardian at that school, where now we have the ability to come off and respond to a tragedy somewhere else in the community or in another school without putting us in a situation where we're liable for coming off that school. As far as the visibility, you know, again, it goes back to that SRO. You know, is that person sitting in the office? What we're telling Monument Academy is we want them out there visible. We want them playing with the children. We want them at lunchtime. We want them engaged in the parking lots before and after school. So that was just our commitment to holding us to that expectation. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say that all 3 of my children went to Monument Academy, and it's a great organization, in my great institution, in my opinion. I support this as well.
I just have one comment, and it kind of goes along with what Trustee Stevens was saying. Item 8 of the SROs, the SRO will assist and provide supplemental course instruction relating but not limited to the Constitution and local law, presentations, social media and cyber safety, drug interactions, explicit mobile device communications, and constitutional law. This is when we talk about our officers being involved with these youths in our community and now giving them the opportunity to be involved with them in school and actually giving them, our officers, things to do with the students in the classroom, taking it beyond just walking the school and making sure it's safe. To me, that creates better mental health, and it creates that relationship with the officer to where the officer is not something to be concerned with. He's a fellow member of your community. So I'm just really happy to see that in there, and thank you guys for adding that, and thanks to our department for being willing to do those things.
Thank you, Mayor. And the DA, I had lunch last week with him, the commander and I. You know, Chief, what type of crime are you seeing in Monument? We're saying, you know, some car break-ins, you know, people leaving stuff in, you know, some assaults, you know, your domestic violence, but we're also seeing some sexual assaults at a very young age. And I really think to your point, Mayor, that when we look at, you know, posting of pictures on social media as a form of bullying, or we look at, you know, education on when no means no, and those tough issues to talk about, you know, we're truly creating that whole child and letting them know just how serious this is, especially if they're not getting that, you know, in other areas. You know, obviously it's the parent's job to parent, but it's our jobs to notice that child that maybe just needs a little more supplemental attention. So, yeah.
Any other comments for the board? Okay. If there's no further discussion, I'll look for a motion.
I would like to put a motion to approve resolution number 63-2022, a resolution approving intergovernmental agreement between the town of Monument and Monument Academy for one school resource officer for the 2022-2023 school year.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Hogan?
Trustee Stevens,
Yes.
trustee LaKind,
Yes.
trustee Shaning,
Yes.
trustee Romanella,
Yes.
trustee Ramos,
Yes.
Mayor Wilson.
Yes. That motion passes 6-0. That takes us to item 6, discussion items, overnight camping policy. Ms. Ruiz.
Thank you. So included in your packet today is an interpretation that I put together regarding overnight camping. So there is no term within the Land Development Code for overnight camping. So I took a look at the most closely related uses and definitions to identify where overnight camping may be allowed. So that would be anywhere where a recreational vehicle park or freight or truck yard is a permitted use. So whether that's conventional zoning or within a PUD. The purpose of this interpretation is so that it could be used in enforcement. So if somebody is not located within a property that use has been permitted, not only is it a permitted use by zoning, but an associated site plan to permit that use has also been approved, then they would be in violation. So code enforcement would be able to work with that property owner to have them stop that use. Or if it truly is a recreation camp or a freight or a truck terminal, then they could submit to go through the proper process to allow for that use. And then I don't know, Chief, if you wanted to chime in any further regarding the code enforcement aspect of it.
Mayor and Board, I think this is a good start to you know, we've had many discussions on this with Trustee Shanning, and I think that, you know, there is a call in the community for us to do a little more with, you know, people just living wherever they want without getting too far in the weeds and trying to over policy or over ordinance. I think going back to that original intent of the property usage and drafting, you know, that language into the ordinance, I think that'd be a great start, and then maybe we could modify it later if we're not seeing it. I think again the private partnership between the Monument Police Department and the officers, we've been doing a tremendous job getting compliance, and I think something like this will also prevent us from displacing some of these quality of life issues into the enclaves that we can't necessarily police, or that maybe another law enforcement agency isn't taking it serious. So I think this is a good start.
Okay. Discussion from the board?
Yeah, I just had a question. Last time this topic came up, you said your concern was that people would move outside of the town boundaries and then they'd still be nearby, but still causing it. What solution or what impact would this have on that concern?
I think it gives us, Trustee Stevens, I think this gives us that alternative. If we still have one or two places that were originally intended for some type of camping or overnight stay, it now allows an alternate for the officer to say, hey, you know, we prefer to see you in that location. And then going back to one of our kind of breakout meetings with Trustee Shanning was that maybe enhancing the level of fencing or lighting or where people are staging in the approved lots would certainly address some of the quality of life issues. So I think this, like I said, I think this is a good start, and I think it's addressing what Trustee Shanning's hearing from her constituents, but also giving the officers the alternative other than just, go to the edge of town and set up shop there.
Thank you so much for all the work that you all put into this. I really appreciate it. And I know that a lot of the community appreciates it as well. You guys spent weeks and weeks and weeks, so thank you.
I want to say thank you as well. He took it from me. I have one question, Chief. So this is basically giving you a little more authority, and then the places that still don't mind, maybe if it's a private business like a Walmart or the Pilot, if they don't mind having vehicles there, it's not forcing you guys to do anything. They could, a business or could still say we're completely fine having people stay there or maybe not complain to you. So you could still potentially corral people where you would want them.
That's absolutely correct. And, we saw a recent example. There was a coffee shop. I won't single anybody out, but there was a coffee shop in town and, just an RV, parked in a handicap zone. And, that wasn't the original intent when you go back to zoning and this, again, it allows us to put them in other areas. And, we've been getting a good deal of compliance with that private partnership. And I think this, like I said, instead of just being on the outskirts now, hey, this is a set location, and let's work on the design. Let's get more involved with, the truck stops and say, how do we make this less of an attractive nuisance to our community?
Awesome. Thank you all very much.
Okay, so Ms. Ruiz, you're not looking for any direction at this time, correct?
That's correct. It's just informational.
Okay. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 6B, future well sites. Mr. Tharnish.
Evening, board. Here. The discussion we have the agenda tonight has to do with one of the projects that's listed in our COP bond projects. We had originally planned to drill an Arapahoe well, and in association with that, we would have had to build a water treatment plant to process that water because Arapahoe wells are deep wells that have a lot of iron and manganese in them. But since that time, we've changed a bit because we've been talking a lot about the Loop project. That's the project that's going to allow us to bring our reuse water back into town. That's truly a regional effort involving, at least right now, 4 different entities and 20 to 25 miles of pipeline, a treatment plant. Pretty extensive, expensive project. But one of the things we've learned as we progress through this process is that that project is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5 years, and it could be off by a year or two, before we'd actually see that water tie into our system, just because of the infrastructure required to bring that to us. So in the meantime, we haven't spent any of that money, either that plant or that well, because it's been kind of set aside. But one of the things that we're coming up with, as our wells get older, they're requiring more and more maintenance. And one of the issues that comes up sometimes is we have a well or two that we have to shut down for maintenance reasons. And yet we still have additional needs with our current system. So one of the thoughts that we've been talking about at the upper levels of the senior management is taking that money that was set aside for well number 11, which again was going to be an Arapahoe well, and drilling 2 smaller wells, which can be done at a much quicker pace and require less maintenance to maintain. They don't require any water treatment. You pump them out of the ground, we inject a little chlorination in them, and they go directly into the system. No treatment plant required. The average cost for these wells is around $600,000 each. We had 1.2 million set aside for well number 11. So the thought process is if we could basically just change
Instead of drilling one deep Arapahoe well, drill 2 Denver Basin wells for the same price. The other advantage we will have is that with Denver Basin wells, we will be required to return a certain portion of that water to the creek system, which in turn drives up our ability to regain that water in a reuse fashion downstream. Whenever the system comes online, we'll have more water available than we currently do. The 2 wells will have more confirmation on the cost for these wells by the end of the month. There's currently a project that is nearby that has very similar type wells that are out for bid. And as soon as those numbers come in, we'll have a good idea what a typical well will cost. So the 600,000 could vary by a little bit. And once we know that number, then I'll talk to the town manager and we'll figure out a game plan for that. But right now, what we're having this discussion about is basically, instead of drilling 1 deep well for 1.2 million, we want to try to drill 2 Denver Basin wells. We could most likely get those drilled later this fall and bring them online before the end of the year. That will help us prep for next summer and give us a little more versatility as to what wells we can cycle on and off. Even when the loop project comes online, now we have additional backup supplies by having these wells already in service. So that's really what I'm here tonight to discuss or take any questions you may have concerning that. It's just a redirection of
So
what the
you're
original plan was.
so you're just looking for direction to continue looking into the possibility of 2 Denver Basin wells.
Yes,
Okay.
we're looking to direct instead of 1 deep water well to go to 2 wells, a little shallower than that.
Okay. Questions from the board?
Quicker.
Did we make a decision that we are going forward with the loop project?
No, we have not. We're not at that point yet. It's still in preliminary stages. We're looking at different kinds of funding from infrastructure standpoint, and we're also still giving presentations at various other board meetings. We did a Palmer Lake Town Council presentation about a month ago. Tomorrow morning, I have to go to the Cherokee Metro District and help with the presentation there. So we're still working out the details of it, trying to finalize the costs for that entire project. And because it's such a large undertaking, there's a lot of there's gonna have to be a lot of agreements from all the different entity boards before any serious money is spent towards this system, because it's going to be in the, in the $100 and $150 million range when all's said and done.
All right, and the reason why I ask is because with your direction that you're looking to go in with the 2 shallower wells, does any of this change if we were to decide to go with the other solution, the other water solution?
You mean as far as the
northern delivery with
the loop project?
No,
No, not the loop.
that Tri-View, yeah, I hope that would never happen, but
I'm just, just.
The drilling of these 2 wells is not going to affect either the Tri-View's northern delivery system or the loop project. One of those 2 will happen, in fact, if not both of them, at some point. This is to give us some immediate supply for the next several years so that we can still be prepared whether those projects come to fruition or not.
Okay.
and this gives us redundancy once those projects are in
It
effect.
does. It does give us some backup supply. Hopefully, when the loop project supply is complete, we will ship probably 65–70% of our demand will come from that system. And we'll be able to use these wells mostly during the summer for what they call peaking purposes. In the
Okay.
winter, we may be able to rest them for long periods of time.
And
Trustee Shaning?
Just a quick question. If I missed this, I apologize. Why did we decide to start investigating this route with the 2 wells in the Denver Basin rather than the 1 large well in the Arapahoe? What made us kind of switch?
Well, it came down to, once we got a better handle on what the timelines for the loop project were coming into play, we needed to do something in the meantime. the Arapahoe well, especially where we were going to drill that a little further south. The question when you drill south anywhere near the Baptist Road corridor in that area, no matter whether you're with Denala, Triview, or the town of Forest Lakes, any wells within a certain distance of that corridor have high levels of radium. And so we've gone through this process of adding, $1 million worth of treatment to treat one of our wells already. Denver basins are a little less worrisome along that area, and the two sites, as stated in the memo here, are on town-owned parcels already. So there's no easements required. There's no acquisition of property. We just need a window of opportunity to get those drilled. And once we get a little further along and we get contracts, we'll bid it out, and the bids will come back to the board to approve. I did mention in here that we were trying to get 2 of them drilled. We do have a third site that we may look at next year for the same type of thing, but we'll wait to see how the first 2 go before we bring that to the board.
So in clarification to Trustee Shading's question, the Arapahoe well also was most likely going to require that additional plant, correct?
Yes.
So that removes that possible future cost of an additional plant.
Yes, that 5.7 million that's in the budget for to build that treatment plant. There's a good chance that a majority of that is going to have to be used to make up the large difference on the current tank and pipeline project. When we originally had priced that, I think 3 to 4 years ago, at about 5 million, and as the board has approved the tank at 3.4, I believe, 3.4 million, and the pipeline was 7.2 roughly. We're going to need that additional funding to shift to that project, basically. So in essence, we're shifting from an Arapahoe well to 2 Denver Basin wells.
Okay. Trustee Ramos?
It's actually the same question I had. So either one of these, it's not really going to make a big difference. I'm sorry, if we move to do the 2 wells, it's not going to make a big difference whether we do the loop or the other project. This is not going to negatively or positively affect that in a way.
No, if anything, it's gonna buy us some additional capacity until those projects get to the point where they're under construction. And then we'll have a timeline as to when.
Yeah, I completely agree. I understand that. I mean, once one is built, does one of these, I guess, tie in better? I know this is more going to be the reserve, but once the, 5 years down the line, once our other project is complete, does one of these, whether having one large Arapahoe or the 2 Denver-based wells, are those going to, does one work better with the future project? I guess is what I'm asking.
I think as far as working better, water is water. The only difference being with 2 of these Denver Basin wells, we'll have more capacity than we would have with 1 Arapahoe well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Additional capacity.
Trustee Stevens?
Yes. When I came on board years ago, a few years ago.
Years ago.
Years ago. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, I think our consumption was about 700 to 750 acre feet per year. Has that gone up? Or I guess my question is, why are we building? Why do we need more wells, or what was the concern in regards to that?
Well, lately our average usage in this town is around 440 acre feet a year. It used to be around 390 to 400.
Okay. So
And for planning purposes, whenever we have a subdivision come in, we typically plan for a half acre foot per house per year. So if you build 200 homes, that's 100 acre feet of water that we're going to need to supply for the next 100 years. So we look at our capacity of our wells, we do consulting with our specialist and determine when we can plan for the next addition of supply, knowing that the loop project could bring us project water in that 5-year time frame. But how do we get from there to the 5-year point out? Well, in the meantime, while we're adding additional houses or businesses coming in, we just want to make sure we have some backup supply to that, because some of our older wells are causing problems a little bit each year. minor problems that we've been able to deal with. But whenever a 200 gallon a minute well goes out of service, now we would have that ability to bring these smaller wells online to make up that difference for a period of time. So it gives us a little additional insurance, a little additional capacity at about half the cost of a deep water well.
Okay, so you're planning for these new developments that we're putting in.
It plays into the equation.
Mhm.
I mean, some of them are built into our water master plan, but there are things coming up in the next year or so that weren't in the original plan. And so once we update our water master plan, that'll help us determine to make sure we have enough capacity to meet demand.
Thank you.
And just a clarification question on, off the subject of a well, but on the tank. What's the timeline on that being finished?
Originally it was scheduled for mid to late December. We're probably more like mid to late January, somewhere there. We just want to make sure it's online with the pipelines associated with it at the latest by mid-April, because
Okay.
that's when our demand starts to pick up, when irrigation systems start to come online, so on.
Okay, and once that's completed, we're gonna pretty immediately try to start repairs on number one, or?
Well, we're gonna begin the construction on the other tank, most likely in the next 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
Depending on some legal issues that we're working through the town attorney as far as that land acquisition. Once that's complete, then the other tank on top of Monument Hill will go to bid under construction, and it'll be probably 4 months behind the other one. So
Okay, great.
hopefully
Thank
we'll
you.
get that online before next summer begins.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? And the board is good with the direction Mr. Tharnish is taking?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Tharnish, you have your direction. This takes us to item 7, public comments. Is there anyone here in person that would like to make public comment? Seeing none, Mr. Anderson, do we have anyone online that would like to make public comment? Okay, Mr. Kimple, if you would like to take yourself off mute, you can make public comment.
Good evening, board. Appreciate the time that you always provide and give. And I apologize for not being there in person. I was attending a school function for the back to school or introduction to teachers. But I had a question. I guess I should just make this statement. I fully support and I truly believe in school safety and children's safety. I am 100%. I mean, I don't have any kids, but I am 100% for child safety, and I think I've said that over and over again. I guess my disappointment is with the SRO agreement that was passed. Number one is not having Casey Summers there to answer any questions, since he is in charge of District 38, which Monument Academy falls into, especially with the cost that we're talking about. And maybe to answer the question as to why Monument Academy was the one that was selected. I know the president of Monument Academy was there, and he mentioned about 1,100 students going to the 2 campuses. But what about all the other students that are going to start school tomorrow and all the other high schools, middle school, elementary schools in District 38, which Monument Academy falls in? I guess that's my question is, why Monument Academy and not the other schools where the other, my understanding is the other schools in District 38 hire retired sheriffs from El Paso County or elsewhere to be SROs, but unfortunately they're not there in the schools or able to be in the schools every day, which potentially this one officer coming off the police force might be for Monument Academy. As I seen this firsthand because I substitute on my days off in District 38, so I've seen it in the past. So that would have been my question to Mr. Casey Summers is why in District 38 was Monument selected to have the SRO for from the Monument Police Department and not worked out something else like the other schools in the district have. And I'm just trying to understand more after reading the agreement. And that's my main question, is why Monument Academy and not the other schools, and how are we going to address the other schools in District 38 when they have just as large, if not a larger, student population as compared to Monument Academy. So I would just like to mention that, and hopefully keep that in everyone's back of their head when they think about this, if there's an opportunity to expand this program or if not. So thank you for your time, and hopefully I hear the discussion about the reasons why Monument Academy, or the chief of police can answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, do we have anyone else online that would like to make public comment? Okay. We will move on to board authorization items. Trinity Community Park presentation, September 19th, Ms. Vandenhoek.
Members of the Trinity Church would like to come and make a presentation to the board about a new park that they are building for the community. So they're just asking for permission to come on September 19th to make that presentation.
And that will be during the regular board meeting, correct?
Correct.
Is that good with the board? Okay.
Yes.
And then we have no other staff authorization items. Trustee Shaning, you had a request for the PUD clarification.
Yes, I think we should schedule a workshop, or at least an agenda item where we could discuss the PUD list, such as lot requirements, density, and so on and so forth, so that we could get a little bit better control of that plan. So I don't know if we would do that as a workshop or just regular agenda, but I wanted to put that out to the rest of the board.
I like that idea.
Which idea is that? A workshop?
I don't know which way. to
Let's
do
go
it,
with a
but I
workshop, like
would
30
like us
maybe.
to discuss the PUDs and see if we can get more details similar to what Mr. King was discussing.
I think with us having to postpone 2 workshops in a row, we're going to be over workshopped between now and the end of the year,
Especially with budget, right?
with all of them probably being budget. I would like some clarification on what exactly we're looking for and who it exactly affects. I don't see, and this is just my belief, I don't see the things like density and stuff having an effect on a whole lot of property because of so much property already in the works here in Monument. We could be possibly putting ourselves in a workshop that only affects, 10 properties. So I would like more information before we decide to make it a workshop or an agenda item. And I'd be happy to say, can we give the town staff direction to provide us with something that would give us an idea of what Trustee Shaning is asking for and what it would look like? Would that be possible, Mr. Rees?
Like you're looking for some clarification, right?
Right.
So it sounds like you're looking for a discussion regarding one of 2 things, and I'm not quite sure, so I'm looking for clarification as well. Either amending our existing checklist that identifies what level of detail the applicants have to provide, or you're looking to amend the regulations to put in caps in the regulations, and I'm not sure which way you're wanting to go.
Actually, both. So when we were discussing earlier requiring the site plan for all of them, and then we moved forward with, as Mr. King brought up, the sketch plan is the requirements are so vague right now. So I would be happy if we looked at that. I think that could be an agenda item as far as providing direction to the staff to look into how much property, how much real land would be affected if we went into a similar type workshop where we took in the design standards for commercial. If we looked at doing a workshop for design standards on residential lot requirements, density, and so on and so forth, how much actual property would that affect right now?
So I would suggest maybe that these are two separate actions and efforts, because this, looking at the checklist, that would be fairly easy for us to take a look at the checklist and see if there's additional level of detail that's desired versus doing a code revision to do something similar to the industrial standards. That would require a lot of, obviously, public outreach and meetings and so on. So that would take a lot more effort and time and thought.
So do we want to start with just a discussion on the checklist?
How about if we do that and maybe over the next couple of months, the staff could look more at, I don't know, I can't really be the sole person that's providing direction, so I kind of would need the rest of the board to weigh in here, but I guess without knowing how much real property we're talking about, that's hard to do.
My take on what Mr. King, for example, was speaking about today was if there even is an opportunity for us to be able to talk about almost, I guess, setting a requirement for sketch plans of having to stick somewhat close to it. Seems like there's so much leeway when it comes to, in the packet I read, it's just about hopes and dreams, which was kind of a weird way to write it. It's just like the best marketing piece that's put out there. And then it seems like it's not really anything that is something that has to be followed. Is it even something we could potentially look at in keeping a sketch plan? I guess maybe making a little more rules to that on what they can or can't promise.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing more than anything is looking at the checklists versus the regulations. That sounds like that's the bulk of it, is just the level of detail. Staff would most certainly need direction from the board as to what additional information you want included before we amend those checklists and send them out to members of the development community. So that would seem like it would have to be either as a workshop or it could be under discussion items, but we would definitely need some guidance there.
Could we do it in the same way that we did the last set, where you work with one or two of us at a time and then bring it back to the board for a discussion after we formulate a type of list?
I guess I'm not sure if you're all, you have consensus at this point, just based on the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this has gotten a little confusing. I feel a sketch plan is what it's supposed to be, an idea. Restricting it, why not just make it a final PD? Because yes, it is it is hopes and dreams, but you have to have people buy into those hopes and dreams. And if you can't get a sketch plan down, they're not going to buy into proper, you're not going to have houses being built or businesses coming in if they don't know that option's there. So a sketch plan, it should be a sketch plan. The checklist, what are we just wanting to see what we can change on the checklist?
Yeah, just to get to where sketch plans have to have a little bit more info. I think that we could, especially since we decided it's not going to be coming to the board. Okay, so when it goes to planning, what can we look at the list in a way that makes sense and say, okay, this needs to be added, this needs to be added, just to provide a couple more safeguards for some of these developments as they progress through the cycle.
So I would think we could look at the checklist and then provide those recommendations to staff.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll start with board members that have a suggested recommendation can send them to staff. Staff can compile those and bring those back to us as a board for further discussion and clarification. Does that work?
Sounds good.
Okay.
I agree with that, Mr. Mayor.
Is there any other board authorization items? Okay. That takes us to Board of Trustee comments. Do we have any Board of Trustee comments? Okay. I have one. I believe that Monument Academy acts independently from D38, even though D38 is technically kind of the host district. Mr. Graham, would you clarify that on how that works for me?
Absolutely. So Monument Academy is a D38 school. However, we are a charter school, which is independent in the sense that D38 is just our authorizer. And so when I talk
Authorizer.
about 1,150 students coming to our school, that's going to be independent of D38. So the gentleman that posed the question on there about having Dr. Summers here, that would be a question that would need to be directed back to the D38 board, because Monument Academy has our own board, our own budget. So
Okay.
that clarifies that.
Yes, and Chief Hemingway, we have discussed with D38 and looked to expand our program. You mentioned that they have great SROs right now and they're happy with them. We are working with them in hopes in the future that an opportunity comes available, correct?
Yeah, and back to this and the grant, this was the first step in Mr. Foreman and my vision to show how we're doing it a little bit differently from the sheriff. Nobody's better or worse. You know, the vision with the bell to bell and the redundancy, I think we're a little, it's a little more feasible for us on the north end because we can backfill a lot quicker because we're right here. You know, so again, we're not doing any better than the sheriff. We're just doing it differently. We have had those discussions, Mayor. They have outstanding SROs that are completely engaged and I would be shocked of them wanting to replace those SROs right now. So I think, you know, speaking for Dr. Summers, based on our conversations, I don't think he would be opposed to looking at a hybrid for purposes of attrition as we move forward. But he certainly is committed to supporting and keeping his SROs right now.
Excellent. Thank you for the clarification. Is there any other Board of Trustee comments? Okay. That takes us to item 10, executive session. Trustee Romanello, do you have a motion for the executive session?
Yes, sir, I do. I was not prepared. Give me a quick second. I'm prepared. All right.
Did I give you the right sheet?
No, I don't know. Yes. Oh, no. Yes.
Yeah, they're two-sided.
That got it. Thank you. I move to enter into executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-402 4B and 4E to discuss the town's contract with TPX, the town's IT provider, and develop negotiation strategy, instruct negotiators, and receive legal advice regarding these contracts. I further move to adjourn the board meeting at the conclusion of the executive session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Hogan, will you take roll?
Yes.
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 That motion passes 6-0. At this time, we will take a 5-minute recess. We will clear out this room except for those involved in the executive session, and we will not be returning to the regular meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.